Maria Rodriguez clutched the hospital discharge papers with trembling hands as she watched her 8-year-old daughter Sofia lying motionless in the pediatric intensive care unit. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the little girl's pale face, making her appear even more fragile than she already was. Tubes and wires connected Sofia to various machines that beeped and hummed continuously, creating a symphony of medical urgency that had become Maria's constant nightmare soundtrack for the past 6 weeks. Dr. Patricia Chen, the lead pediatric cardiologist, approached Maria with that familiar expression of professional compassion mixed with barely concealed helplessness. Maria had seen that look countless times over the months, and each time it appeared, her world seemed to crumble a little more. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm as she explained the situation once again, though Maria already knew every devastating detail by heart. Sofia had been born with a rare congenital heart defect called hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a condition so severe that it essentially meant she was living with only half a functioning heart. The condition required a series of complex surgical procedures, and Sofia had already undergone 2 of the 3 necessary operations. However, complications from the second surgery had left her in a critical state, and now she desperately needed a heart transplant to survive. The waiting list for pediatric heart transplants was notoriously long, Dr. Chen explained, and Sofia's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Without a suitable donor heart within the next few months, there would be nothing more they could do. The words hit Maria like physical blows, each sentence another weight added to the crushing burden she already carried. Maria was a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. During the day, she cleaned office buildings downtown, and, in the evenings, she worked as a waitress at a small family restaurant. Neither job provided adequate health insurance, and the medical bills from Sofia's treatments had already pushed the family into bankruptcy. The specialized care Sofia needed was available at only a few hospitals in the country, and the costs were astronomical. The financial counselor at the hospital had been kind but brutally honest about their situation. Even if a suitable donor heart became available, the transplant surgery alone would cost over $800,000, not including the months of intensive postoperative care and the lifetime of anti-rejection medications that would follow. Maria's insurance would cover only a fraction of these costs, leaving her responsible for an impossible sum. Every night, Maria would sit beside Sofia's bed, holding her daughter's small hand and whispering stories about all the things they would do together when Sofia got better. They would go to the beach, where Sofia had always wanted to build sandcastles. They would visit the zoo, where Sofia dreamed of seeing real elephants. They would have picnics in the park, something they had never been able to do because Sofia's condition made physical activity dangerous. These dreams felt increasingly hollow as the days passed and Sofia's condition continued to worsen. The little girl who had once been bright and talkative now spent most of her time sleeping, her energy sapped by her failing heart. When she was awake, she would ask Maria when she could go home, when she could play with her toys again, when the machines could be turned off so she could sleep without the constant beeping. Maria had exhausted every conventional option available to her. She had applied for every medical grant and assistance program she could find. She had started a crowdfunding campaign online that had raised a few $1,000s, but it was nowhere near enough. She had reached out to local charities, churches, and community organizations, all of whom wanted to help but simply didn't have the resources to cover such massive medical expenses. The social worker assigned to their case had suggested that Maria consider transferring Sofia to a public hospital where the costs might be lower, but the specialized care Sofia needed wasn't available at those facilities. Moving her could mean giving up the expertise of the medical team that had been treating Sofia since birth, a team that understood her unique case better than anyone else. Desperation had driven Maria to consider options she never thought she would contemplate. She had looked into selling everything she owned, including the small house she had inherited from her mother, but even that wouldn't come close to covering the costs. She had considered taking out loans against her future earnings, but no bank would approve such a massive amount for someone with her income level. Late one evening, as Maria sat in the hospital cafeteria picking at a sandwich she couldn't afford but needed to eat to keep her strength up, she overheard a conversation between 2 other parents whose children were also patients in the pediatric ward. They were discussing a newspaper article they had read about Alexander Blackwood, a tech billionaire who had made headlines recently for his massive charitable donations to various causes. According to the article, Blackwood had just announced a new philanthropic initiative focused on medical assistance for children in need. The program was said to have a budget of $50 million and was specifically designed to help families facing impossible medical costs. The parents were debating whether it was worth trying to contact him, whether someone like Blackwood would even consider helping ordinary families like theirs. Maria listened to their conversation with growing interest, though she tried not to appear too eager. After the couple left, she found herself thinking about what they had said. She had heard of Alexander Blackwood before, of course. His company, Quantum Dynamics, had revolutionized cloud computing technology, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the world. His personal story was well known in business circles. He had built his empire from nothing, starting with a small software company in his college dormitory room. What Maria didn't know was much about his personal life or his motivations for giving away such vast sums of money. The media portrayed him as somewhat reclusive, a brilliant but private man who rarely gave interviews and seemed to prefer letting his work speak for itself. His philanthropic efforts had focused primarily on education and technology access for underserved communities, making this new medical initiative somewhat of a departure for him. The next morning, Maria found herself researching Alexander Blackwood online during the brief periods when she could leave Sophia's bedside. What she discovered surprised her. Despite his immense wealth and success, Blackwood had experienced significant personal tragedy in his own life. His younger brother had died of leukemia when they were both children, an event that had profoundly shaped Blackwood's worldview and eventually influenced his decision to focus on philanthropy. The more Maria read, the more she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be the answer to her prayers. Blackwood's new medical assistance program was still in its early stages, and the application process wasn't clearly defined yet. Most of the information available online was from press releases and news articles rather than detailed program guidelines. Maria spent hours crafting what she hoped would be a compelling letter explaining Sophia's situation. She wrote about her daughter's condition, the urgent need for a transplant, and the impossible financial burden they faced. She included medical records, financial statements, and photographs of Sophia, hoping to create a complete picture of their desperate circumstances. The challenge was figuring out how to get the letter to Alexander Blackwood himself. His company had multiple layers of assistants, public relations staff, and corporate gatekeepers who would normally screen such requests. Maria knew that a letter sent through normal channels would likely never reach him personally, but she also knew that this might be their only chance. After much research, Maria discovered that Blackwood maintained a personal office separate from his corporate headquarters, and that he occasionally visited a particular coffee shop in the financial district where he was known to conduct informal meetings. It was a long shot, but Maria decided it was worth trying to approach him directly. The plan felt both desperate and slightly absurd, but Maria was beyond caring about conventional approaches or social protocols. Her daughter was dying, and she would do anything, no matter how unconventional, to save her. She carefully prepared multiple copies of her letter, along with a folder containing all of Sophia's medical documentation, and set out to find Alexander Blackwood. What Maria didn't realize was that her decision to take this desperate step would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change Sophia's life but would also profoundly impact Alexander Blackwood himself. The billionaire, despite his reputation for being somewhat aloof and focused primarily on business matters, was about to encounter a situation that would challenge his assumptions about wealth, responsibility, and the true meaning of making a difference in the world. The stage was set for an encounter that would surprise everyone involved, including Blackwood himself, who had no idea that a desperate mother's plea was about to force him to confront questions about his own values and priorities in ways he had never expected. Maria Rodriguez stood outside the gleaming glass building that housed Alexander Blackwood's personal office, her hands shaking as she clutched the folder containing Sophia's medical records and her carefully written letter. She had been waiting for over 3 hours, watching the flow of well-dressed executives and assistants moving in and out of the building. Her plan, which had seemed reasonable in the desperate clarity of the previous night, now felt foolish and presumptuous. The security guard at the front desk had already told her twice that Mr. Blackwood wasn't taking unsolicited meetings and that she would need to go through proper channels. Maria had tried to explain the urgency of her situation, but the guard, though polite, was clearly following strict protocols. She was beginning to realize that getting close enough to Alexander Blackwood to deliver her letter would be far more difficult than she had imagined. As the afternoon wore on, Maria found herself studying every person who entered or left the building, trying to identify which one might be the billionaire she had come to find. She had seen pictures of him online, but those were usually formal corporate headshots or distant shots from business events. She wasn't entirely sure she would recognize him in person, especially if he was dressed casually or surrounded by other people. Alexander Blackwood, meanwhile, was having one of the most challenging days he had experienced in months. A major software launch that his company had been working on for 2 years had encountered critical bugs at the last minute, potentially delaying the release and costing millions of dollars. He had spent the morning in emergency meetings with his development team, trying to find solutions that could salvage the timeline without compromising quality. The stress of the situation was compounded by his awareness that this particular project was more than just another product launch for his company. The software was designed to help hospitals and medical facilities better coordinate care for patients with complex conditions, something that had personal significance for him given his brother's experience with the healthcare system years earlier. As evening approached, Blackwood finally emerged from the building, his usual entourage of assistants and security personnel accompanying him to his waiting car. He looked exhausted and preoccupied, his mind still focused on the technical problems his team was working to resolve. This was the moment Maria had been waiting for, though she almost didn't recognize him at first. The billionaire looked younger than she had expected, and more approachable despite his obvious fatigue. He was dressed in a simple dark suit without the flashy accessories she had somehow imagined a man of his wealth would wear. As he approached his car, Maria made her decision and stepped forward, her heart pounding with nervous energy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Security personnel quickly moved to intercept her, and she found herself surrounded by several large men in suits who were clearly trained to handle potential threats. Maria tried to explain that she just wanted to deliver a letter, that she wasn't dangerous, but the security team was focused on getting Blackwood safely into his vehicle. However, something about the scene caught Blackwood's attention. Perhaps it was the desperation in Maria's voice, or the fact that she was clearly not the typical corporate executive or ambitious entrepreneur who usually tried to approach him. He held up a hand to stop his security team and looked directly at Maria for the first time. The billionaire's first impression of Maria Rodriguez was of a woman who was clearly at the end of her rope. Her clothes were clean but worn, her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Most importantly, there was something in her expression that Blackwood recognized from his own past, the look of someone fighting desperately for something that mattered more than life itself. Against the advice of his security team, Blackwood approached Maria and asked her what she needed. The question, delivered in a calm and surprisingly gentle voice, nearly overwhelmed Maria with relief and hope. She quickly explained that she had a letter about her daughter's medical situation, that it would only take a moment of his time, and that she understood he was probably busy but that this was literally a matter of life and death. Blackwood accepted the folder from Maria's trembling hands and told her he would review it personally. He also gave her a business card with a direct phone number and told her she could call in a few days to discuss the matter further. The entire interaction lasted less than 3 minutes, but, for Maria, it felt like a miracle had just occurred. What Maria didn't realize was that Alexander Blackwood was already intrigued by their brief encounter. Something about her approach, direct, honest, and completely without pretense, had reminded him of his own mother, who had fought tirelessly for his brother during their family's darkest period. The memory of those days was something Blackwood rarely allowed himself to revisit, but Maria's desperation had triggered emotions he had thought he had successfully buried. That evening, instead of reviewing the technical reports his team had prepared about the software problems, Blackwood found himself reading Maria's letter and studying Sophia's medical records. The little girl's case was heartbreakingly similar to his brother's situation, though the specific medical condition was different. The same sense of urgency, the same impossible financial pressures, the same feeling of helplessness in the face of a medical system that seemed designed to help only those who could afford it. The medical records painted a clear picture of Sophia's condition and prognosis. The child had been born with a heart defect so severe that she had required multiple surgeries just to survive her first few years of life. Now she needed a heart transplant, and, even if a suitable donor became available, the costs associated with the surgery and follow-up care would be astronomical. What struck Blackwood most forcefully was not just the medical complexity of Sophia's case, but the financial documentation that Maria had included. The woman had clearly spent months researching every possible source of assistance, applying for grants, seeking help from charitable organizations, and exploring every conventional option available to her. She had sold most of her personal possessions, taken on additional work despite the time she needed to spend at the hospital, and had even borrowed money from friends and extended family members who had very little to give. The thoroughness of Maria's efforts impressed Blackwood almost as much as her desperation touched him. This wasn't someone looking for a handout or trying to take advantage of his wealth. This was a mother who had exhausted every other option and was making a final, desperate plea for help to save her child's life. Blackwood spent most of the night reading and rereading the materials Maria had given him. He also found himself researching pediatric heart transplants, learning about the challenges facing families in similar situations, and discovering that Sophia's case was far from unique. Thousands of children were on waiting lists for organ transplants, and many families faced the same impossible choice between bankrupting themselves to pay for treatment and watching their children die. The next morning, Blackwood did something highly unusual. He cleared his schedule and asked his assistant to arrange a visit to the hospital where Sophia was being treated. He told his staff that he wanted to learn more about pediatric cardiac care as part of his philanthropic planning, which was technically true, though it didn't capture the personal motivation driving his interest. Dr. Patricia Chen, Sophia's cardiologist, was surprised to receive a call from Alexander Blackwood's office requesting a meeting. She had heard of his new medical philanthropy initiative, of course, but hadn't expected him to take such a direct interest in individual cases. When she learned that he was specifically asking about Sofia Rodriguez, she was even more intrigued. The doctor agreed to meet with Blackwood, though she was careful to explain that patient privacy laws would limit what she could discuss without the family's permission. Blackwood assured her that he had spoken with Maria Rodriguez and had her consent to learn more about Sophia's condition and treatment options. Dr. Chen was impressed by the depth of Blackwood's questions during their meeting. He didn't just want to know about Sophia's specific case, he wanted to understand the broader challenges facing pediatric transplant programs, the factors that determine success rates, and the long-term prospects for children who receive transplants. His questions revealed both genuine concern and a sophisticated understanding of complex medical issues. During their conversation, Dr. Chen mentioned something that would prove to be crucial to everything that followed. She explained that while Sophia was indeed on the waiting list for a heart transplant, there was an alternative that might be possible in her specific case. A new experimental procedure was being developed at a research facility in Switzerland that had shown promising results for children with Sophia's particular heart defect. The procedure was still in clinical trials, which meant it wasn't available through normal treatment channels in the United States. However, a few American patients had been accepted into the experimental program, and the results had been encouraging. The challenge was that participating in the trial would require Sophia to travel to Switzerland for several months, and the costs associated with the experimental treatment, travel, and extended stay would be even higher than a traditional transplant. Dr. Chen had mentioned this option to Maria Rodriguez several weeks earlier, but they had both dismissed it as financially impossible. The total cost would likely exceed $1 million, and there was no insurance coverage available for experimental treatments conducted in foreign countries. It had seemed like just another reminder of how many options were available to wealthy families that remained out of reach for everyone else. However, when Dr. Chen explained this alternative to Blackwood, she could see his immediate interest. The experimental nature of the treatment appealed to his background in technology and innovation, and the possibility of helping to advance medical research while potentially saving Sophia's life aligned perfectly with his philanthropic goals. Blackwood asked Dr. Chen to provide him with detailed information about the Swiss research program, including contact information for the medical team conducting the trials. He also requested a complete assessment of Sophia's suitability for the experimental treatment and a realistic timeline for when such treatment might be possible. As he left the hospital that day, Alexander Blackwood was already formulating a plan that would go far beyond simply paying for Sophia's medical care. He was beginning to envision something much more ambitious, a comprehensive approach that would not only help Sophia but could potentially change the way pediatric cardiac care was delivered to children from low-income families. 3 days after his hospital visit, Alexander Blackwood called Maria Rodriguez using the number she had provided in her letter. Maria was sitting beside Sophia's bed when her phone rang, and she almost didn't answer because she didn't recognize the number. When she finally picked up and heard Blackwood's voice introducing himself, she thought for a moment that someone might be playing a cruel joke on her. Blackwood's voice was calm and professional, but there was an underlying warmth that surprised Maria. He explained that he had reviewed her letter carefully and had met with Sophia's medical team to better understand her condition. What he said next left Maria speechless. He wanted to arrange a meeting to discuss not just helping with Sophia's immediate medical needs, but exploring a potentially better treatment option that had recently become available. The meeting took place 2 days later in a private conference room at the hospital. Maria had expected to meet with Blackwood alone, but he arrived with a small team that included a medical coordinator from his philanthropic foundation, a specialist in international medical transport, and Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, a pediatric cardiac surgeon who had flown in from Switzerland specifically for this meeting. Dr. Hoffman was the lead researcher for the experimental treatment program that Dr. Chen had mentioned. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an immediate, reassuring presence. She explained to Maria that Sophia's case was particularly well suited for the experimental procedure they had been developing, and that early results from similar cases had been extremely encouraging. The Swiss treatment was fundamentally different from traditional heart transplants. Instead of replacing Sophia's defective heart with a donor organ, the experimental procedure involved using advanced bioengineering techniques to reconstruct her existing heart using a combination of synthetic materials and her own cellular tissue. The process was complex and would require several months of treatment, but, if successful, it would give Sophia a fully functional heart without the lifelong complications associated with organ transplants. Dr. Hoffman showed Maria detailed medical animations explaining the procedure, along with case studies from other children who had undergone the treatment. The results were remarkable. Children who had been near death were now living normal, active lives with fully functioning hearts. The long-term prognosis was excellent. And, unlike transplant recipients, these children wouldn't need to take anti-rejection medications for the rest of their lives. Maria listened to the explanation with growing amazement and hope, but also with a nagging fear about what such advanced treatment would cost. When she finally asked about expenses, the answer left her stunned. Alexander Blackwood explained that his foundation would cover all costs associated with Sophia's treatment, including the experimental procedure, months of accommodation in Switzerland, all travel expenses, and even living expenses for Maria so she could stay with her daughter throughout the treatment process. The billionaire went on to explain something that surprised Maria even more than his generous offer. This wouldn't simply be a charitable donation, but the beginning of a larger research partnership between his foundation and the Swiss medical team. Sophia's case would help advance the development of this revolutionary treatment, potentially making it available to thousands of other children in the future. Blackwood had spent the days since their first meeting working with his legal and medical advisors to structure an arrangement that would benefit not just Sophia, but advance pediatric cardiac care more broadly. His foundation would fund an expansion of the Swiss research program, enabling them to treat more children and accelerate the development of the technique. In return, the research data generated would be shared with pediatric hospitals throughout the United States, potentially revolutionizing how children with congenital heart defects were treated. Maria struggled to process the magnitude of what was being offered. Just a week earlier, she had been facing the impossible choice between watching her daughter die or bankrupting her family in a desperate attempt to pay for treatment that might not even be available. Now she was being told that Sophia could receive the most advanced cardiac care in the world, completely free of charge, as part of a research program that could help countless other children. Dr. Hoffman explained the timeline and logistics involved. If Sophia was accepted into the program, which would require some additional testing and evaluation, they could begin treatment within 3 weeks. The initial phase would involve stabilizing her condition and preparing her for the complex procedure. The actual reconstruction surgery would take place after about a month of preparation, followed by several months of recovery and rehabilitation. Throughout this process, Maria would be provided with accommodations near the medical facility, along with a living allowance sufficient to cover all her expenses. The foundation would also arrange for Sophia to continue her education during the treatment period, working with tutors who specialized in helping children manage schoolwork while dealing with serious medical conditions. What Blackwood didn't immediately reveal to Maria was the personal motivation driving his extraordinary commitment to Sophia's case. The night after their first meeting, he had called his mother for the first time in several months. During their conversation, he had told her about Maria and Sophia, and his mother had reminded him of details from his brother's illness that he had tried to forget. She reminded him of the nights she had spent researching experimental treatments, writing letters to specialists around the world, and making desperate phone calls to anyone who might be able to help. She recalled the crushing weight of watching her child suffer while feeling completely helpless to change the situation. Most importantly, she reminded him of how different their family's experience might have been if they had had access to unlimited resources and the best medical care available. Blackwood's brother had ultimately died not because effective treatment didn't exist, but because the most advanced care was available only at facilities his family couldn't afford. The guilt and regret associated with that realization had motivated much of Blackwood's later philanthropic work, but he had never before encountered a situation so directly parallel to his own family's experience. Maria's acceptance of the foundation's offer initiated a whirlwind of activity that transformed not just her life but also her understanding of what was possible when resources and determination were combined with genuine compassion. Within a week, she and Sophia were flying to Switzerland in Blackwood's private jet, accompanied by a medical team that monitored Sophia's condition throughout the flight. The medical facility in Switzerland was unlike anything Maria had ever seen. It looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital, with spacious patient rooms that featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Alps. Sophia's room was equipped with every conceivable comfort, including a play area with toys and games designed to keep children entertained during long periods of recovery. Dr. Hoffman and her team immediately began a comprehensive evaluation of Sophia's condition, using diagnostic equipment so advanced that it could create three-dimensional models of her heart in real time. The testing confirmed that Sophia was an excellent candidate for the experimental procedure, and they scheduled the surgery for 6 weeks later, giving her time to build up her strength and adjust to the new environment. During the preparation period, Maria watched her daughter's spirits improve dramatically. Sophia was enchanted by the mountain views from her room, delighted by the international staff who spoke to her in multiple languages, and excited by the prospect of getting a new heart that would allow her to run and play like other children. For the first time in years, Sophia began talking about future plans that extended beyond just surviving her medical condition. Maria found herself building relationships not just with the medical staff, but with other families whose children were also receiving treatment at the facility. She met parents from around the world who had brought their children to Switzerland for various experimental treatments. Some were wealthy families paying for the care themselves, but many others were there through research partnerships and philanthropic arrangements similar to the one that had brought Sophia. The diversity of these families helped Maria understand that her situation, while unique in its specific details, was part of a much larger story about the intersection of medical innovation, economic inequality, and the random nature of genetic conditions that could affect any family regardless of their circumstances. She began to see Sophia's treatment not just as a personal miracle, but as part of a broader effort to make advanced medical care accessible to families who otherwise couldn't afford it. As the date of Sophia's surgery approached, Maria found herself dealing with emotions she hadn't expected. The relief and gratitude she felt toward Alexander Blackwood and his foundation were overwhelming, but she also struggled with guilt about receiving such extraordinary help when so many other families in similar situations continued to face impossible choices. Dr. Hoffman, who had experience helping families navigate these complex emotional issues, spent time talking with Maria about these feelings. She explained that every family that participated in the research program was helping to advance medical knowledge in ways that would eventually benefit many others. Sophia's case would provide valuable data that could help refine the treatment process and make it more effective for future patients. The surgeon also shared something that surprised Maria. She revealed that Alexander Blackwood had been in regular contact with the medical team throughout Sophia's preparation period, asking detailed questions about her progress and requesting updates on how she was responding to the preliminary treatments. His involvement went far beyond simply writing a check. He was genuinely invested in Sophia's recovery and in the success of the research program. 3 days before Sophia's scheduled surgery, Alexander Blackwood arrived in Switzerland to visit the medical facility and meet with the research team. When he stopped by Sophia's room to see how she was doing, Maria was struck by how naturally he interacted with her daughter. He didn't talk down to Sophia or treat her like a sick child. Instead, he engaged with her as if she were any 8-year-old he might meet, asking about her favorite books and games, and listening seriously to her descriptions of the view from her window. During their conversation, Sophia told Blackwood that she planned to become a doctor when she grew up so she could help other children who had heart problems like hers. The billionaire's response surprised both Sophia and Maria. He told Sophia that if she was still interested in medicine when she was older, his foundation would provide scholarships to help her pursue medical education. It was a casual comment, but one that revealed the depth of his commitment to Sophia's future beyond just her immediate medical needs. The day of Sophia's surgery arrived with a mixture of hope and anxiety that Maria had never experienced before. Dr. Hoffman and her team had spent months preparing for this procedure, and the confidence they displayed helped calm Maria's nerves, though nothing could completely eliminate the fear that comes with watching your child undergo such major surgery. Alexander Blackwood had remained in Switzerland for the operation, though he kept a respectful distance from the family during the intense pre-surgery period. His presence at the medical facility, however, ensured that Sophia had access to every possible resource and that the surgical team could focus entirely on the complex procedure without any concerns about logistics or support. The experimental surgery lasted 14 hours. Dr. Hoffman emerged from the operating room every few hours to update Maria on their progress, explaining that everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The bioengineering techniques they were using to reconstruct Sophia's heart were working perfectly, and her body was responding well to the synthetic materials being integrated into her cardiac tissue. During the long hours of waiting, Maria found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months earlier, she had been a desperate mother facing an impossible situation with no apparent solutions. The idea that she would somehow find herself in one of the world's most advanced medical facilities, watching her daughter receive cutting-edge treatment that wasn't available anywhere else in the world, would have seemed like an impossible fantasy. What struck her most profoundly was not just Alexander Blackwood's financial generosity, though that had obviously been crucial, but the thoughtful way he had approached Sophia's situation. He hadn't simply written a check and walked away. Instead, he had invested time in understanding the medical complexities involved, researching the best possible treatment options, and creating a comprehensive plan that addressed not just Sophia's immediate needs but her long-term prospects for a normal, healthy life. When Dr. Hoffman finally emerged from the operating room with the news that the surgery had been completely successful, Maria felt a relief so overwhelming that she nearly collapsed. The surgeon explained that Sophia's reconstructed heart was functioning perfectly, and that all the bioengineered tissue had integrated successfully with her existing cardiac structure. The little girl was already showing signs of improved cardiac function, and her vital signs were stronger than they had been in years. The recovery period that followed was remarkable in its speed and completeness. Within a week, Sophia was sitting up in bed and asking when she could go outside to see the mountains up close. Within 2 weeks, she was walking around the hospital corridors with more energy than she had displayed since early childhood. The reconstructed heart was not only functioning properly but was actually performing better than a normal heart for a child her age. Dr. Hoffman explained to Maria that the bioengineered cardiac tissue had several advantages over both natural hearts and traditional transplants. The synthetic components were designed to grow and adapt as Sophia grew, meaning her heart would develop normally throughout her childhood and adolescence. Unlike transplant recipients, Sophia would never need anti-rejection medications, and her risk of future cardiac problems was actually lower than that of children born with healthy hearts. Alexander Blackwood visited Sophia regularly during her recovery, and Maria began to understand that his interest in her daughter's case had evolved into something much deeper than philanthropic obligation. He would sit with Sophia while she did her physical therapy exercises, help her with schoolwork when she felt up to it, and listen patiently to her detailed descriptions of how much better she felt each day. During one of these visits, Sophia asked Blackwood a question that would prove to be more significant than anyone realized at the time. She wanted to know if other children would be able to get the same heart surgery she had received. When he explained that the research program was still experimental and that it would take time to make the treatment widely available, Sophia announced that she wanted to help other sick children get better hearts too. This conversation sparked an idea that would ultimately transform Blackwood's approach to medical philanthropy. Working with Dr. Hoffman and her research team, he began developing plans for a much larger program that would make the experimental heart reconstruction technique available to children throughout the United States. The program would be funded through his foundation but would operate in partnership with major pediatric hospitals across the country. The plan was ambitious in scope. Over the next 5 years, Blackwood's foundation would fund the establishment of bioengineering laboratories at 10 children's hospitals, train surgical teams in the new techniques, and provide funding for treatment of up to 500 children annually. The goal was to transform the experimental procedure into a standard treatment option that would be covered by insurance and accessible to families regardless of their financial circumstances. Sophia's case would serve as the model for this expanded program. The detailed medical data from her surgery and recovery would be used to refine the treatment protocols and train new surgical teams. In a very real sense, Sophia would be helping to save the lives of hundreds of other children by serving as the proof of concept for this revolutionary treatment approach. 3 months after her surgery, Sophia was cleared to return home to the United States. Her recovery had exceeded every expectation, and she was now able to engage in all the normal activities of childhood that had been impossible before her treatment. Dr. Hoffman declared the experimental procedure a complete success, and Sophia's case was selected as the lead example in research papers that would be published in major medical journals around the world. The flight back to the United States was a celebration in itself. Sophia spent most of the trip excitedly planning all the things she wanted to do now that she had a healthy heart. She wanted to learn to ride a bicycle, join a soccer team, and go swimming at the community center. These simple childhood activities, which most families take for granted, represented miraculous possibilities for a girl who had spent most of her life restricted by her cardiac condition. Alexander Blackwood accompanied Maria and Sophia on the flight home, and, during the journey, he shared with Maria his plans for expanding the heart reconstruction program. He explained that Sophia's successful treatment had convinced him that this technology could revolutionize pediatric cardiac care, and that his foundation was prepared to commit $50 million over the next 5 years to make it widely available. What he didn't tell Maria, because he thought it might overwhelm her, was that he had also established a personal trust fund that would ensure Sophia's continued access to the best possible medical care throughout her life. The fund would cover any future medical needs, provide for her education through college and beyond, and support any career aspirations she might develop. He had done this not out of pity, but because he genuinely believed that Sophia represented the kind of person who would make important contributions to the world if given the opportunity. When Sophia and Maria finally returned to their hometown, the transformation was immediately apparent to everyone who knew them. Sophia, who had been a pale, frail child dependent on constant medical monitoring, was now a vibrant 8-year-old bursting with energy and excitement about life. The change in Maria was equally dramatic. The stress lines and exhaustion that had marked her face for years had been replaced by a radiance that came from watching her daughter thrive. The local hospital where Sophia had initially been treated organized a welcome-back celebration that drew attention from medical professionals throughout the region. Dr. Chen, Sophia's original cardiologist, was amazed by the results of the experimental treatment and immediately expressed interest in learning more about the techniques that had been used. She would later become one of the first doctors trained in Blackwood's expanded heart reconstruction program. The media attention that followed Sophia's return was initially overwhelming for Maria, who had never expected their story to become public. However, she gradually came to understand that sharing their experience could help other families facing similar situations. She began speaking at medical conferences and fundraising events, telling the story of how desperate circumstances had led to an encounter that changed everything. What surprised Maria most about the aftermath of Sophia's treatment was the ongoing relationship that developed with Alexander Blackwood. She had expected that once Sophia's surgery was complete and successful, the billionaire would move on to other philanthropic projects. Instead, he remained involved in their lives, checking regularly on Sophia's progress and taking a genuine interest in her development and education. This continuing relationship helped Maria understand something important about Blackwood's motivations that she hadn't initially grasped. His commitment to Sophia wasn't driven primarily by guilt or obligation, but by a genuine belief that every child deserved the chance to reach their full potential regardless of the circumstances of their birth. Sophia's case had reminded him of why he had become wealthy in the first place, not for the personal satisfaction of accumulating money, but for the power wealth provided to make meaningful differences in the world. 6 months after their return from Switzerland, Sophia started 3rd grade at her local elementary school. For the first time in her life, she was able to participate in all the normal activities of childhood. She joined the school soccer team, learned to ride a bicycle, and made friends with children who knew nothing about her medical history. To her classmates, she was simply Sophia, an energetic, bright girl who happened to be exceptionally appreciative of every day she got to spend playing and learning with them. The heart reconstruction program that grew out of Sophia's case would eventually help more than 1,000 children over the following decade. Dr. Hoffman moved to the United States to lead the program, establishing training centers at major children's hospitals and developing standardized protocols that made the complex surgery reproducible by skilled cardiac teams around the country. Alexander Blackwood's approach to this program became a model for other philanthropic initiatives in medical research. Instead of simply funding existing treatments, he focused on developing and scaling innovative solutions that could address systemic problems in healthcare access. The success of the heart reconstruction program led to similar initiatives in other areas of pediatric medicine, ultimately creating a comprehensive network of advanced treatment options for children from low-income families. For Maria, the most profound change was not just Sophia's physical transformation, but the shift in how she thought about the future. For years, her planning had extended only as far as Sophia's next medical appointment or the next bill that needed to be paid. Now she found herself dreaming about Sophia's high school graduation, college plans, and the career she might choose as an adult. The little girl who had once told Alexander Blackwood that she wanted to become a doctor to help other children with heart problems never wavered from that goal. As she grew older, Sophia would indeed pursue medical education, eventually becoming a pediatric cardiac surgeon herself. Her unique perspective as someone who had experienced the patient side of revolutionary medical care made her an exceptionally compassionate and effective physician. Years later, when asked about the day his mother approached a billionaire on a busy street corner, Sophia would say that it represented something much larger than one family's medical crisis being resolved through extraordinary generosity. It demonstrated what becomes possible when desperation meets opportunity, when innovation combines with compassion, and when individual acts of courage can spark changes that benefit countless others. The story of Maria Rodriguez and her daughter Sophia became a testament to the power of human connection to transcend economic and social barriers, and to the potential for individual actions to create ripple effects that extend far beyond their original intentions. What began as a desperate mother's plea for help became a revolutionary advancement in pediatric medicine that would save thousands of lives in the years to come.